that I will soon be there. Whisper of how I'm yearning to mingle with the old-time throng. Give my regards to old Broadway and say that I'll be there ere long.
Oh, what a beautiful morning, Gerald. Did you do the homework from our last lesson?
Did I ever? I can't get those songs from Showboat out of my head. Life upon the wicked stage ain't ever what a girl supposes.
Well, actually, Gerald, that leads us perfectly into our next lesson. Lesson 2, Rodgers and Hammerstein. Oscar Hammerstein II was born in 1895 in New York City. His father was a theatrical manager, and his grandfather, Oscar Hammerstein I, was one of the great opera theater impresarios. They may have mentioned his name in Love Never Dies. Ugh. Anyway, with his father producing numerous vaudeville shows, Oscar quickly developed a love for the theater, and particularly for writing lyrics. Richard Rodgers was born in 1902 in Queens, New York. Although he was the son of a physician, Rodgers' family was extremely musical, and he himself was considered something of a prodigy. Young Dick was playing operetta scores from memory by the age of 8, and would grow up to attend Columbia University, with the slightly older Oscar Hammerstein, though they never collaborated, and eventually the Institute of Musical Arts, now known as the Juilliard School. Dick and Oscar were always drawn to the theater, and they had illustrious writing careers before they ever teamed up. Hammerstein spent the 1920s writing operettas with composers such as Rudolf Frimmel and Sigmund Romberg. But as we mentioned in our last lesson, his most successful pre-Rodgers collaboration was with Jerome Kern. Their first show, Sunny, in 1925 was a hit, but just 2 years later they'd premiere one of the first great masterpieces of the American musical theater, Showboat. Rodgers, on the other hand, struck up a friendship at Columbia with lyricist Lorenz Hart. He and Larry began writing together, but real success eluded them until their song Manhattan, with its catchy melody and intricate rhyme scheme, became a hit. After that, they had a slew of popular shows like A Connecticut Yankee, Babes in Arms, The Boys from Syracuse, based on Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors, and the revolutionary Pal Joey in 1940. Another musical to push the form to its limits, Pal Joey told the story of an affair between a married woman and a gigolo, played by a 20-something Gene Kelly. The show had a cynical tone, features unlikable characters who don't change, and there's no happy ending. Pal Joey opened to mixed reviews, but the songs, like many Rodgers and Hart tunes, are still well known today, like Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, I Could Write a Book, and Zip. By the early 1940s, though, both Rodgers and Hammerstein had hit something of a career slump. Oscar hadn't written anything successful in years, and his dream project, adapting Bizet's Carmen for an entirely black cast, was taking longer than expected. Dick, on the other hand, was dealing with the unreliability of his partner Lorenz Hart, who was an alcoholic, extremely depressed, and bitterly hidden in the closet. Hart would go on alcoholic binges and disappear for days on end, making work with him extremely difficult. It was in these days that both Oscar and Dick became attracted to Lynn Riggs's play, Green Grow the Lilacs. But with Jerome Kern uninterested and Larry Hart incapable, the men decided to take a chance and write the show together. The musical, like Showboat before it, would change everything about musical theater.
Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain.
Oklahoma? Seriously, Emily? That musical was revolutionary? It's just a dopey show about cowboys. All my musical theater friends tell me they're way too cool for Oklahoma.
Well, they may be way too cool for Oklahoma, Gerald, but no musical today would exist if Oklahoma didn't come first. Every show written before Oklahoma had the book or the script follow the songs. But Rodgers and Hammerstein turned the formula on its head. In Oklahoma, the songs were in service of the story for the very first time. Oklahoma had no stars in the cast, and no songs meant to showcase a star like most musicals did at the time. Rather than opening with a big flashy number with a million chorus girls, Oklahoma opens with an old lady churning butter and a lone cowboy singing about what a great day it is. Choreographer Agnes DeMille used dance to convey the story, most notably ending the first act with a 15-minute dream ballet. Song and dance were integrated into the plot like never before, and though it wasn't the first musical to deal with interpersonal relationships or serious themes, these storytelling techniques were positively revolutionary. The story didn't stop for a musical number. The musical numbers were the story. The original production opened on March 31st, 1943, and broke box office records, running for 5 years and over 2,000 performances. Rodgers and Hammerstein didn't intend to write hits, but Oklahoma churned out a ton, like People Will Say We're in Love, Oh What a Beautiful Morning, I Can't Say No, still my favorite song about a woman actually enjoying flirting, Someone Please Cast Me as Ado Annie Now, ah! Oh, and of course, the title song.
Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain.
And cool or not, Oklahoma is still one of the most produced musicals in America to this day, because there are ways it can always stay relevant. In 1998, there was a revival in London that had two major firsts. The first time the actress playing Laurie did her own dream ballet, and the first time she was in overalls. Oh, and it starred a little guy, you might know his name, a little guy named Baby Hugh Jackman. Anyway, just last year in Oregon, there was a production that flipped the genders of the characters, even making Aunt Eller a trans woman, and giving the show a completely different subtext with its LGBTQ themes. And of course, there is a major Tony Award-winning Broadway revival playing right now at Circle in the Square. This production completely subverts the norms established by the original by going minimalist and abstract with the set, band, and cast. Not to mention Ali Stroker won a Best Featured Actress Tony, making her the first performer in a wheelchair to do so. And okay, yeah, you probably know it as the Oklahoma that...
Wow, I was wrong. Oklahoma, you're okay.
With their partnership solidified, Rodgers and Hammerstein would spend the next 15 years dominating Broadway and ushering in the golden age of musical theater, pushing the limits of the craft and writing songs that would become all-time classics. In 1945, their musical Carousel premiered on Broadway. Based on the play Lilium, the show told the story of a doomed love affair between a fiery carousel barker and an impressionable young woman. Much darker than Oklahoma, Carousel featured dance as a major storytelling element, extended scenes that were both sung and spoken, no overture, and an Act 1 finale where our anti-hero, Billy Bigelow, sings a 7-minute soliloquy. Carousel received a few major Broadway revivals, most notably in 1994 with Audra McDonald winning her first Tony Award for playing the supporting role of Carrie Pipperidge, and in 2018 with Lindsay Mendez winning her first Tony Award for playing the supporting role of Carrie Pipperidge. Note to self, must play Carrie Pipperidge. After Carousel came Rodgers and Hammerstein's first movie musical, State Fair, in 1945. And a couple years later, Dick and Oscar became producers, putting their money behind Irving Berlin's wildly successful new musical, Annie Get Your Gun, starring Ethel Merman. Berlin was an old veteran of Broadway by that point and was deeply skeptical of R&H's situation shows, but he knew their clout would not be denied. This was followed up by the team's first Broadway flop, Allegro, an extremely experimental show that popped out only one memorable song, The Gentleman is a Dope. Not wanting another disappointment, Rodgers and Hammerstein turned next to James A. Michener's book, Tales of the South Pacific, which they adapted into the musical South Pacific in 1949. South Pacific focused on two love affairs on a South Asian island during World War II. One is between a Navy nurse named Nellie Forbush, written for Broadway star Mary Martin, who falls in love with an older Frenchman who has two mixed-race Polynesian children from a previous marriage. The other love affair is between a white sailor and a native island girl, and the realities that come with wartime romance. Many of the songs would become standards like Some Enchanted Evening and Younger Than Springtime, but it was You've Got to Be Carefully Taught, Hammerstein's biting commentary on racism that was initially met with backlash by the producers. Oscar insisted, though, that if you remove this song, then you might as well throw away the whole show. Rodgers and Hammerstein stood firm, and it paid off, with South Pacific running for over 5 years and winning the Pulitzer Prize for Drama in 1950. Side note, if Some Enchanted Evening isn't in your top 10 most romantic musical theater song clickbait video, then you don't know romance. The lyrics are pulled from Hammerstein's real-life experience of meeting the love of his life, Dorothy, across a crowded room. Oh, swoon. Rodgers and Hammerstein immediately followed this up with The King and I in 1951. Based on the book Anna and the King of Siam, the story is about an English teacher in the 1860s who moves to Siam to be governess to the king's many children. The role of Anna was written for Gertrude Lawrence, and the titular king was played by an unknown Yul Brynner, who would later win an Academy Award for his portrayal in the film version. The King and I was another hit for the team, running for 3 years and producing many hit songs like I Whistle a Happy Tune, Getting to Know You, Something Wonderful, and Shall We Dance? 2 major disappointments would follow, with Me and Juliet in 1953 and Pipe Dream in 1955. But in 1957, the team would bounce back in a major way with an unprecedented television event, a live performance of a completely new musical. That TV event was Cinderella, broadcast live on CBS on March 31st, 1957, and starring Julie Andrews, who was riding high off the success of My Fair Lady, which had just opened on Broadway the year before. Over 107 million viewers tuned in, an unprecedented number for the time. And many of the songs would become classics like In My Own Little Corner, Impossible, and 10 Minutes Ago. Cinderella would be revived on television twice, in 1965 starring Leslie Ann Warren, and again in 1997 starring Brandy and Whitney Houston. And in 2013, Cinderella finally received a proper Broadway production with an updated book by Douglas Carter Beane. By now, Rodgers and Hammerstein were getting older, but not running out of ideas. In 1958, Flower Drum Song opened on Broadway and was one of the first musicals to feature an almost entirely Asian cast. Although the musical was directed by Gene Kelly, featured plenty of hit songs like I Enjoy Being a Girl, and dealt with complex themes like the differences between the generations amongst immigrant families, Flower Drum Song opened to mixed reviews and middling success compared to their previous works. The show received its only Broadway revival in 2002, though, starring Lea Salonga, and with David Henry Hwang providing updates to the libretto. 1959 marked the final collaboration between Rodgers and Hammerstein when The Sound of Music opened on Broadway. Dismissed by many critics as being too saccharine, The Sound of Music was based on the true story of the Von Trapp family, and it became Rodgers and Hammerstein's most indelible hit, due in no small part to the 1965 film version, which was the most financially successful film adaptation of a stage musical ever. But I don't need to tell you that. Really think about it, Gerald. Even people who don't like musicals like The Sound of Music.
Let's test that theory. Roger!
Yeah.
Do you like musicals?
No, are you serious? I hate musicals. Why would you be talking one moment and then singing the next? Conceptually, it's a nightmare. It's just a man utilizing catchy melodies to keep their masses in their place, making us relate to things like the King of Siam or the Common House Cat. And I know the military-industrial complex built that helicopter for Miss Saigon, glamorizing war and shit.
Okay. But do you like The Sound of Music?
I love that movie. Oh, man. The story is amazing, and Julie Andrews is perfect. She has the voice of an angel. Oh, my mom used to sing that song to me when she'd put me to sleep. Edelweiss, Edelweiss.
It is a beautiful song, Emily.
It is. And it's the last song that Rodgers and Hammerstein would ever write together. In fact, it was the last song Oscar ever wrote, as he died from stomach cancer on August 23, 1960, at the age of 65. The lights of Times Square were turned off for 1 whole minute in recognition of his enormous contributions to American musical theater. Richard Rodgers, though, would press on for almost 2 more decades. In 1962, he wrote both music and lyrics for the musical No Strings, and in the years to follow, he wrote new musicals with the likes of Stephen Sondheim, Martin Charnin, and Sheldon Harnick. Finally, in 1979, Dick passed away at the age of 77. Richard Rodgers was a musical prodigy who could write melodies that were catchy, haunting, delightful, and intricate. Oscar Hammerstein pushed the Broadway book to its limits and wrote timeless lyrics that were earnest without being corny, as Kansas and August. With their powers combined, Rodgers and Hammerstein broke ground in the world of musical theater that cannot be understated. Stephen Sondheim, one of the foremost writers of musical theater in the latter 20th century, was mentored by Oscar Hammerstein. And near the end of Oscar's life, he gave Stevie a gift.
Oscar was dying, and he had a lunch for his birthday. And he had on top of the piano 2 small piles of formal photographs. He asked me if I wanted one. And I thought, it's like my father giving me, but I said, sure, I'd love to have one. I said, would you sign it? And he looked at me. Suddenly he got a smile on his face, and he signed it. And it said, for Stevie, my friend and teacher. And in King and I, he talks about how by your pupils you are taught. And that's what he meant. And of course, it was a major moment for me, and still is.
And that, Gerald and Roger, is the history of Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Wow.
Okay, your homework, students, is to go watch a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. If you've seen The Sound of Music, you have to watch something else. Luckily, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. There is this beautiful Rodgers and Hammerstein collection you can get on DVD, which has all of the movie versions of all their musicals. You can also stream a lot of them online, like on services like Amazon Prime. And YouTube is always a great resource. Lots of different clips, including from the '99 Oklahoma with Hugh Jackman. And there's lots of different books and biographies about Rodgers and Hammerstein. My favorite is Something Wonderful by Todd S. Purdom. It's a great, extensive bio on the 2 men. And finally, you can catch a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical performing live if you're really lucky. There's national tours, regional theater, community theater, even high school and middle school productions. Expand your musical theater knowledge, and it'll make you a better musical theater performer, I promise. Until next time, Broadway babies, getting to know you, getting to know all about you.